Rules Committee come to order, and welcome back to the Rules Committee for a fabulous new meeting. Louise, good to see you. Today, the committee will be considering H.R. 2936, the Resilient Federal Forest Act of 2017. This legislation is a comprehensive bill aimed at expediting and improving forest management activities in our federal forests. The bill seeks to return resiliency to our forest system, and obviously this is a very interesting bill. Our national forests have become increasingly overgrown. They're fire-prone, and their thickets due in part to lack of active management, such as thinning forests to reduce fire danger. As a result, catastrophic wildfires are growing in number, in size, in intensity, and quite honestly are devastating many parts of the West, which has a huge impact on our environment. In 2016 alone, that's excluding this year's data, a total of 4,312 structures were destroyed by wildfires, including 3,192 residences and 1,025 minor structures and 78 commercial structures. Most disturbingly, the agency data indicates that 349 lives have been lost to catastrophic wildfires in the last 20 years. This legislation is important because the current path of forest management on public lands is outdated, unsustainable, and quite honestly, dangerous, if not deadly. Without objection, I'd like to welcome the gentleman from Utah, Chairman Rob Bishop, a former member of this Rules Committee for some 8 years, and the gentleman from Oklahoma, the great young Congressman Frank Lucas, my dear friend, who is going to try and not engage in the battle with Mr. Cole, knowing that they meet this weekend together. We're sorry that the gentleman from Arkansas, the gentleman, Mr. Westerman, is stuck in a plane and cannot be here on our first panel. So we're delighted to have you both. I'm going to have you both come up to the I'm going to have you both come up, and before we go any further, we're going to go to the ranking member, the gentlewoman from New York, who is always afforded this time. The gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you. I just want to say something you may know, maybe not, but I want to take a minute to express my deepest condolences to the victims and their families in New York City and Lower Manhattan. Most of the details are still uncertain, but we recently learned a motorist and a rented truck drove down a busy bicycle path near the World Trade Center Memorial and struck several people. Shots were reported to have been fired, and we have received confirmation that 6 individuals have died and at least 15 have been injured. The driver was captured. He's now hospitalized. There was also involvement of a school bus for special needs children that was hit. So we're very much concerned, but we know that the New York Police Department, the EMTs, the fire department, and we think they're the best in the world, are doing everything they can. And I know that you join me in really regretting that on that beautiful fall day on a bike path, somebody decided to drive down it and kill people. So thank you for the moment, Mr. Chairman.
Congresswoman Slaughter, thank you very much. It pains all of us, and as you had suggested, I did not know the facts and the factors of the case, but we do know that there have been 6 people that have lost their lives to a tragic incident, and our not only our thoughts are with you, but the prayers are with the families and those that were nearby. And thank you for the, as you say, the fire department of New York City that once again places itself in a circumstance where they are called upon many times that is very dangerous to them.
And you know, they were just sending people down today to Puerto Rico to put up to try to bring electricity back. New York is, I'm really proud of the fact that whenever there's a problem anywhere, we're there. So, and they are extraordinarily trained. We're very proud of them. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Fire department and
would you please do us a favor, and we will be meeting several times this week. Let's
we'll keep up with how
remember to stay up with that, because we have not only interest here but concern about these
I think it's been considered a terrorist act.
Yeah,
At
see,
least that
that's
was
what I
part of the
wondered.
discussion.
I did not say anything because I did not
That's,
know.
I think that they pretty well decided on that, but we'll be sure. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I hope that you'll keep up with this for us and include us. Gentlemen, welcome to the Rules Committee. Without objection, anything you brought along in writing will be made in order. This is a jurisdictional issue that first comes directly from the Ag Committee, the Agriculture Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Lucas, the former chairman, distinguished gentleman. And you might want to take, Mr. Lucas, a minute if you can. I've been through the briefing a little bit about why you're both here, what Ag has, what the Federal Forest has, what the Park Service has. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I share the compassion and feeling for the gentlelady in regards to her citizens and the folks back home. We seem to live in a challenging world these days on every occasion. Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member Slaughter, members of the Rules Committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today regarding the rule governing debate of H.R. 2936, Resilient Forest Act of 2017, as amended by the House Committee on Agriculture and the House Committee on Natural Resources. As a member and former chairman of the Ag Committee, I have participated in hearings and markups leading to the development of H.R. 2936. Prior to marking up H.R. 2936, the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry held a hearing on forestry initiatives authorized by the Farm Bill, including Forest Service management tools. Members heard testimony from stakeholders representing forestry, sporting, and conservation industries, as well as retired Forestry Service personnel. The testimony highlighted the need for active forest management to address the challenges that the U.S. Forestry Service is facing and the many societal benefits that management yields. This legislation aims to empower the Forestry Service to fulfill its mission by granting more authority and much-needed flexibility to address these challenges of process, funding, litigation, and necessary timber harvesting, and essential active management. The committee enjoyed broad support for the tools authorized in the 2014 Farm Bill, and with this legislation, we aim to take the next step to build upon that work. H.R. 2936 incentivizes and rewards proven collaborative forest management to ensure that local communities have a seat at the table when decisions are made that impact the forest. Additionally, the bill streamlines the Resource Advisories Committee, cutting Washington red tape that's been keeping us from getting work done on the ground, and expanding our work last Congress. The legislation also provides common sense categorical exclusions, or CEs, for certain Forest Service projects. These CEs are routine and known outcomes. With these additional CEs, the Forestry Service will be able to reverse the trend of increasingly lengthy and cumbersome NEPA environmental assessments. Delaying management activities makes forest more prone to fire. The categorical exclusions included in this bill will allow for expedited planning and streamlined projects, as well as timber sale and forest restoration. To conclude, this is a thoughtful, bipartisan piece of legislation. By passing this bill, we'll give the Forestry Service more and better tools to manage and preserve our national forest. In the 114th Congress, this bill passed the House with strong bipartisan support, and we expect that same support this year. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I will be happy to answer any questions, and I enjoy the privilege of appearing with my colleague, the chairman of the Resources Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, thank you very much. With offering pro bono services as you do today, you're well into and well versed in this, and I appreciate you taking time to do this. The young chairman from Utah is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Slaughter, first of all, I think our hearts go out to everyone in New York City that's experiencing this. Our prayers are there with them as well. Part of the jurisdiction of my committee deals with the territories we have, so I spent this weekend down seeing the devastation of the hurricanes in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. You can be very proud that down in the Virgin Islands, as we speak, is a group from the New York City, from their electrical, whatever it's called, up there, that are actually helping restore the lines that are going to go out from Frederickstead to the rest of St. Croix. So I know they're probably in the other islands as well, but they are at least there. You can be very proud of them. One of the things for all of you. I appreciate this time, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Slaughter, and for the rest of you that have nothing better to do with your lives than be here, thank you for being here. One of the things we have talked about in Congress is the natural disasters that have befallen many of our Americans, both in hurricanes, but also in wildfires. The difference between the two is we can't stop wildfires. We can't really stop the hurricanes from happening, but we should do everything we possibly can to do wildfires, and this is the purpose of this particular bill. It is a bipartisan bill that has passed both the Resource Committee and the Agriculture Committee, and we're going to ask for a rule. I'd love it to be closed, but if you can't, at least a structured rule to make this debate go forward on the floor. This is a bill that was done with consultation and consideration from the Forest Service officials in both the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Both of them worked with us in developing this particular bill. These are practices that they both said they can implement on day one after passage. This is what both administrations wanted to help them with their problem. We are taking not only the issue of fire borrowing, which, as you know, takes money away from other projects to put into fire, but adds to it needed reforms that, once again, the Forest Service in both the Obama administration and the Trump administration said they need to improve their practices. It is proactive. And it is also the only comprehensive program we have on the table to not only deal with forest fires funding, but also to deal with how you reform the system in the future to prevent the fires from taking place in the first place. And as the former chairman said in the 114th Congress, we did something very similar. This bill is very similar to what we passed over there at that time, and there have been some improvements with it. Now, look, the federal government owns roughly 10% of all the trees in America. They estimate there is somewhere between 60 and 80 million acres of federal forests that are, in their categories, high risk for catastrophic wildfire. The goal of the Forest Service is to treat 25% of everything they own. They can't get to it because of other limitations, which include categorical exclusions, but also litigation. They can get to maybe 2 to 3% of what they own. That means they can treat 3 million acres a year. If the need is 60 to 80 million acres, they can get to 3 million acres a year. That's 2 decades before they can ever treat what has the potential of blowing up into a catastrophic wildfire. And that's why I say this is something we can prevent. It's not just fighting the fires, it's preventing them in the first place. And the ideas in this particular bill were given to us by the Forest Service in a great deal of concentration and things that they say they can do immediately, day one when it takes place. So sometimes we tend to have a blind allegiance, I think, to bureaucratic processes that do nothing to improve our forest health. This is one of those times when we can actually do things as well as safeguard public input in the language that is here and why it is so important. We have added from last year a binding arbitration concept, a pilot project that is in there, which will allow people to come to the table with reasonable, or insist that people have to have a reasonable alternative and come to the table with it rather than simply saying no and going the route of litigations that are indefinitely going to court after court after court. That's why this bill has the broad support from water boards, counties, tribes, wildlife, sportsmen's group, and even labor unions. It has garnered the support both in the vote as well as in sponsorship in this year and in years past from many Democrats. And we appreciate this being a truly bipartisan bill that we'd like to go and take it to the Senate so we can come up with a bicameral bill that actually solves the problem. So we're going to ask you also, as a Rules Chairman, if you could split the time of the debate between the Agriculture Committee and the Resource Committee. The Forest Service is actually part of the Department of Agriculture, even though both of our committees have jurisdiction on these particular issues. We both have many members that are concerned about it. I'd appreciate that. And like I say, this is one of those things that came to us with a whole lot of input from the Forest Service. These are the things that they want, and not just this Forest Service, but one in the last administration. These are things that they can do to solve a problem, not just try and put out the fires by spending more money, but solving the problem by treating more of the land sooner to prevent it from going up into a catastrophic wildfire in the first place. We can do better. We have to do better. This has to go forward. Thank you. I'm open to any questions that you may have that would prolong this meeting.
Chairman Bishop, Chairman Lucas, thank you very much. I have watched the evolution of this issue for quite some time. As you know, you have been here, Mr. Westerman has been here and spoken on this issue. I do consider it common sense, and while what I think is common sense, maybe some other people oppose, but I remember being at Philmont Scout Ranch in Cimarron, New Mexico, and as a young Boy Scout on my trail to Eagle, looking at the forest that they had at Philmont and trying to learn what we called healthy forest, the activities of healthy forest, where they actually understood that fires do come, that roads need to be there, that there had to be a philosophy, and that vegetation on the ground would be an accelerant and could harm not just the ground, but kill tens of thousands of animals along the way, important animals to a forest. This year, we're looking at an unprecedented problem. How long, once this is done, you talk about day one, how do they go about doing this? Do they do this because it becomes a new philosophy of forest management? Do they do it because it allows them to do things they've been prevented to do in the past? Is it philosophy? Is it work? Is it management? What is it?
And the reason why both Forest Service have approved of this is because it actually gives them the ability of doing what's called categorical exclusion, but you can make things simply streamline the process. All the boxes have to be checked, all the efforts that have to be checked, you can do it once, you don't have to do it multiple times. Mm-hmm. It also will limit the amount of litigation that takes place. Every time you have to do a new study, a new report, it opens the door for more litigation. So as they will tell us, it's time. They will tell us that the biggest cost they have is first in firefighting, and the next biggest cost is fighting litigation. And especially with the arbitration language that's in there, we're trying to come up with a pilot project to see if we can push that even further. But this is what the Forest Service has told us are things that they could do immediately. So they can go in there, and we're not doing away with public input. We're just streamlining it. So you do the public input first, once, you get on with it. And that's what they want so they can move faster. Like I say, if you got 60, 80 million acres, they can do 3 million a year. Part of that 3 million is because they have to go through so many bureaucratic red tape regulations, and then each step of the way, there's new litigation that takes place. Let them give the public input, let them move on with the project, and do it very quickly. And that's what the professionals down there are telling us that they want to use, and they can do this immediately. So it's not necessarily anything new. It's just making it faster and more convenient for them to get at the job.
Processes.
Yeah.
Ms. Lucas, anything to add to that?
I think the chairman is well spoken. While I chair the subcommittee on forestry and conservation, many people, because of Oklahoma's forest industry in the southeastern part of the state, which many people do not ever really have an opportunity to appreciate, it is virtually all on private land. And the management techniques that have been developed and utilized in the last century are quite impressive. If you talk to the chief forester in Oklahoma, he will tell you that the inventory that the state did in 1915 of the amount of timber we have on hand standing and available, and compare it with the most recent inventory, we actually have a larger supply of timber and wood available because of the management techniques that have been practiced. It seems to me that on the federal level, we've been more restrictive and we've made it more complicated to utilize our resources, but there are proven ways to maximize our natural resource, and we're trying to get there.
Well, I've heard this over and over, and I think the point that both of you make, at least Chairman Bishop did, is the number of lives that get caught up of men and women who are jumpers, who are firefighters, and these winds change and the terrible conditions. And so maybe that could be a real common bond thing that comes out of there, where we're saving trees, we're saving animals, we're saving lives, and we can save our forest at the same time, to be smart about it. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm glad that you're here. The distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, Chairman Cole.
Thank you very much. Two of my favorite members, obviously the senior member of my delegation, so my leader, Frank Lucas, and my good friend and classmate, and I had the privilege of sitting on that committee at one time earlier in my career. And I think people on either side of the aisle would tell you you're two of the best legislators we have. I mean, you both really are excellent legislators, and your committees are serious committees. And there's always partisan issues, but it always amazes me how much bipartisanship comes out of both of those committees. This is a really good example of that process at work. I'd be remiss, Mr. Lucas and I do have a difference of agreement that'll be settled on Saturday afternoon in Stillwater, but we agree that the best team in the Big 12 is on that field, and we'll know which one is the best team when it's over. It's going to be a great game. I do have one question for both of you. I have looked at legislation, and I sit on Interior Appropriations, and so we quite often fall victim, as we see funding for the forestry department, things ravaged by these wildfires, and we treat one kind of disaster one way, another kind another. I see you've tried to address this in some, I think, some very thoughtful ways, but the administration seems to have a little difference of opinion, just judging from their statement. Not that they're opposed to the bill, but they see things a little differently and are going to work in the process with you. Could you explain to me what their concern is, and in your view, why it, I would assume, is not justified, or just where we're going on that, on the Stafford Act in particular?
No? Actually, okay, that's too cute. The difference comes from, there are two processes here. What we're talking about and trying to emphasize is the reforms, which means you won't have to spend as much money in the future. What the other element is how we pay for what's already taken place and how we pay for extra wildfires that may develop in the future. There are multiple approaches to do that. The one that we have involves setting caps and going through the FEMA process. That has to do some kind of adjustment with the caps that are there. There are other types of programs or ideas that are out there on how you can actually fund that process. I'm really agnostic as to which of those approaches you use. Either one can work as long as you attach the reforms to it. Because if we're just talking with how you pay for putting out the fires, we miss the intent of it, and we miss the point. And we will always keep exacerbating the cost unless you get the reforms with it. So I'm satisfied with what we have right here, which will deal with the caps, but I'm also saying if there is another way of actually funding this, as long as you couple it with the reforms, we can deal with that.
Well, and to be fair, I think the administration makes clear they do support those reforms that you're doing in that area. And you're absolutely correct, of course. That's the critical part of the bill, is to try and avoid the problem in the first place. But problems happen, and so how we deal with them in the aftermath has created and compounded those problems, as I know both of you know.
And I also assume that once we get this bill through the House and over and then go to some kind of conference with the Senate, those issues will be discussed repeatedly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I have tremendous faith in both of you and both of your committees. I mean, I know it's refreshing to hear somebody say, yeah, we're agnostic about this, we're going to work this out, because I know you guys will. I've watched you do it in legislation before. So I'm pretty comfortable. I'm very comfortable with the bill, and very comfortable with the people that'll be making the final decision when we sit down with the Senate as to what that package is. I know you guys both bring a lot of good sense and a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom to the process. But thank you for looking at it. I mean that quite sincerely, because it sure makes our budget, our spending difficult. And these are reforms that are really, really necessary. So it's the hard work of real legislating instead of, chest pounding and finger pointing. We do a little bit too much around here. So I commend you both and both your committees for approaching it in that manner.
Thank you.
Sure.
You want to give me the line on the game?
You're talking about the World Series?
We're
talking
not
about the
playing in
real game.
Norman, so it may be wild.
I think a high-scoring game. Two great offenses. Anyway, a little bit of good luck on. I hope no injuries to your team on Saturday. But beyond that, I'm not prepared to venture much further.
The only tragedy would be to soften each other up for the rest of the Big 12
That's exactly
league in the
right. So
fall.
we can't allow that to occur. So we want good sportsmanship on both sides. And you go take care of Iowa State for us. We'll take care of TCU for you, and we'll maybe settle this thing down the road.
Very accurate.
Okay, yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from New York.
Well, I too hold these two gentlemen in great esteem, and if you don't feel the same way about me, I don't want to hear about it. And Bishop, you missed the rhubarb pie.
What?
We had rhubarb pie.
I'm filing a formal complaint.
I know we just couldn't
was
find
awesome.
you anywhere.
It was awesome.
I'm sorry Mike Thompson's not here. His plane landed a little while ago. But he's got an amendment, and I hope, do you have any problem with his amendment?
I'm, to be
With
honest,
my-
I don't know.
We'd really like to have it made in order. Mike's district in California, I think, really suffered, the brunt of the fire was really awful for them. And I think the wineries, I've not really heard what happened to them, but I do know from New York, it takes about 12 years for grapes to really produce enough, or vines to produce enough grapes to get back into wine production. And it was an awful thing to see. And I understand that it moved so fast. He mentioned 3 football fields could, in 20 minutes, 20 seconds rather, practically, just would burn. There was no way in the world to stop it. So, what do you
I
think,
believe
Bishop?
there's a substitute, complete substitute for the bill.
For Thompson?
That's what I
Well, then I'll show
see
you up.
it as.
Okay. Well, we'd
So
really like to have it
wouldn't
made
be
in
an
order.
amendment, it'd be, look,
I
we're a
had it down
substitute.
as an amendment, okay.
I could be wrong.
Amendment testimony. Is a
There's
substitute?
only 2 amendments, one's a substitute.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I'd like to give him some consideration on
Well,
that
Mike
because of-
Thompson's a great man. I
Yes,
mean,
he is.
obviously, well, not obviously, I have not looked at the substance of that. If the gentleman would like to.
Has anybody-
Perhaps she's asking
Yeah.
for any feedback on that.
I am told that that's the happen with.
Yeah.
But this is one that deals with simply the funding.
Yeah.
All right, it deals with the funding mechanisms, and there is some problem with that. Like I said, the funding mechanism was a major concern we had. There are a couple of different ways of actually doing the funding. I'm comfortable with the one we have. We run the traps on that. There is another alternative that some members of the Appropriates Committee have come up with that we have run the traps. There is a small hiccup with this particular one that we're looking at. So I do have a problem with the mechanism, not the intent of what he's talking about.
Right.
Because his intent is not to stop the reforms. His intent is to come up with an alternative way of actually doing the funding.
Of doing
And
funding, okay.
I said before, I really am not tied to any particular way, as long as it does a good way. But if indeed we can work out some of those details, that may be one of the things we look at in a conference rather than on the floor.
Okay, I'll tell him that.
Perhaps
Yeah.
a gesture to allow him to be on the committee would be
That would be good.
good.
Oh, hey, we're open to everybody.
Sure. All I'm saying is I
I'm
think
easy.
you heard a good faith effort to work together.
Yeah, okay. All right, it does fall in my lot, though, to put these things in the record. Starting with Oregon State University College of Forestry, which opposes the bill.
Without objection, we'll enter that
And,
letter into the record.
Professional foresters that have between us 100 years of experience in forest ecology, management, and policy, including participation and development of the Northwest Forest Plan.
Without objection, it appears to be a letter from a person.
It's several people. They have 100 years' experience. They're foresters,
Yes, ma'am.
a bunch of them. The backdoor attack on National Monuments and Antiquities Act is opposed by several wilderness societies, League of Conservation Voters, Earth Justice, Center for Biological Diversity, and others.
Without objection, we'll enter that into the record.
34 groups of interest in environmental justice, starting with Alliance for Justice and ending with workplace fairness.
Without
There are
objection.
34 of them opposing the bill, and 71 conservation organizations, beginning with Alaska Wilderness and ending with Wilderness Workshop. And the reasons that they give, they're all pretty much concerned about salvage operations, as I read them.
Objection.
That they don't believe that those, in the bill, particularly in the best interest of the forest. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Boy, as I recall her talk about salvage operations, I recall the really tremendous problem that once there's a blowdown or a fire or these things, that if you don't get in and get your job done quickly, you get beetles, bugs, real problems. And I know that is a major fight that takes place between people who have different ideas.
That is indeed what the Forest Service is talking about, why they want the CADX. Because the excess timber is going to come out one way or another. You either bring it out in a treatment process, scientifically done, or you let it burn. One way or the other is going to come. Bringing it out scientifically is far better than just sitting there and letting it burn, which is what Congressman Thompson experienced in his district when you just let it burn. That's the wrong way of doing it. Cool.
Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Georgia does not seek time.
Why? Why? What do we do wrong?
The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Anyway, thank you both for coming. I appreciate your testimony. I don't agree with the bill, but I would, since we're inserting things in the record, Mr. Cole pointed out kind of the lackluster statement by the administration, which points out a number of concerns that they have with it. I'd like to submit that to the record, but
Without objection, we'll enter the SAP into the record.
I also would like to submit for the record a letter from Raul Grijalva, the ranking member of the House Natural Resources Committee, opposed to it. And interestingly enough,
Without objection.
and this kind of blows my mind, is that some of the administration concerns are the same concerns he has. And, I don't know what's going on here, but in any event, going back to the substitute, I think, Mr. Bishop, you mentioned some budgetary issues. My understanding is your funding mechanism in the underlying bill is going to require a budgetary waiver from the Rules Committee, and so would Mr. Thompson's substitute. So, I mean, I think there are people who have some differing opinions on this, and I would hope that we would start moving toward making more things in order rather than less, because I think the trend is going the other way, where we're bringing things to the floor that are so structured that, and under committee processes that are so structured that a lot of members don't have time to be able to have their input. I mean, I sit on the Agriculture Committee. This passed by voice vote, although my voice was no, but it didn't go through the subcommittee process. And again, I know, I know everybody's anxious to get things to the floor, but we have committees and we have subcommittees, and at some point we ought to let them deliberate on this stuff, and I think you end up with better products. But anyway, I thank you for being here, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The distinguished gentleman from Georgia. Gentleman does not seek time. Gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings.
Thank you very much,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate very much Mr. Lucas and Mr. Bishop's presentations. I do find it ironic, Mr. Bishop, that you began your testimony by citing to the type rule that ought to be offered, and then a bit later on, not even mindful of Mr. Thompson's measure. And I find that passing strange how you could make for some kind of judgment as to the rule and not know the substance of our colleagues' amendment to the rule. But that's one of the problems with this place. We just roll along helter-skelter. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include the League of Conservation's voters' opposition to this measure.
Without objection, we'll enter that in the record.
Mr. McGovern has already introduced the statement of the administration and referred to it as weak. I ask either of you to address one particular provision offered up in the Statement of Administration Policy. In the second paragraph, second sentence, it says, the administration, however, has concerns about the legislation's revisions to the Stafford Act, which would force competition for funding between wildfires and federal land and other disasters already covered by the Stafford Act, including hurricanes. And it goes on in the fourth paragraph to talk about the Stafford Act. And instead of the approach outlined, this administration statement says, in H.R. 2936, the administration supports a separate annual cap adjustment for wildfire suppression operations, which will resolve concerns about the sufficiency of funds for wildfire suppression and avoid unnecessary competition for Stafford Act funds. In your presentations, do you or did you contemplate that the administration would express itself in such a manner that is in derogation of what you all are proposing?
I would simply note to the gentleman from Florida that typically when I bring a bill to before this committee, it's under threat of veto from the administration, always in the past. So I'm not surprised. We will help enlighten them as we work through this process also.
And you sort of feel like it isn't dime's worth of difference in the two there.
This is a subtle threat versus veto, so I guess that's an
But
improvement.
did you all work with them
Yes.
to come to your conclusion? You did, Mr.
Yep.
Bishop?
Yeah, and you have to realize what they're talking about is traditionally there's been a 10-year rolling average from what they are able to do with this particular stuff, right?
Thank you.
The 10-year average changes depending on what has been spent in the last 10. So had this bill actually passed a year ago, when Katrina was part of that 10-year average, there had been no problems, no concerns with what we're talking about. That is no longer there, so the cap has been lowered. That's why we're talking about, and what we're doing here is some adjustments to the cap, which is exactly what they're talking about. That's what we have tried to perform in this particular legislation, is to adjust that cap. So we're cognizant of what they said. We have adjusted that. We have worked with that. But to do that, we also had to have the help of other committees. We don't have jurisdiction over there. That's where the Budget and Appropriations Committee come in. So it's been a convoluted and complicated effort, but we have adjusted that. Now, as I said, there is another alternative that's been floated out there by other members of the Appropriations Committee of an alternative way of funding it that would not play around with the caps. I could do that either. The important part is still to get the reforms that the Forest Service says they want to use so they can actually treat the land. That's the important part. Whether you do the measure we have or whether you do an alternative one or you can come up with another one, as long as it doesn't have some problems. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson has an alternative, but it does have a problem that we haven't been able to mitigate. So if we can do that, that's fine with me. And that will come through in a conference report with the Senate.
Well, one
But
thing
we
I-
actually
yeah.
have taken into account what they said. I think we have come up with an alternative way, working with the other committees to try and solve that problem.
Right. I do commend you for having hearings, but am I correct, borrowing from the dissenting views, that the Forest Service nor the Bureau of Land Management testified at the hearing?
No, we've been doing this for 2 years. So we've
Understood.
had subcommittee and hearing, and yeah, they were all there in all of those. They did testify for them, both, especially the first year they came up with when it was still the Obama administration, of course. They were there testifying, and we're very grateful for their testimony.
Right. And you feel comfortable, Mr. Bishop, disallowing the citizenry to access the court structures? Is your argument that it's too litigious, this environmental protection stuff, or that the citizens be damned?
Well, the Forest Service would answer that in that particular way, not necessarily me. But the issue is we're not limiting anybody's opportunity. We're limiting the multiple layers of information you have to go through, each of which has a chance to be litigation. That's what the Forest Service is saying is holding them back from doing their work in a proper, prudent manner. So no one is limiting anyone's opportunity. We're saying, do your shot first, then don't have to redo the EISs, don't have to redo everything that's simply repetitive and redundant to what was originally done. And every time you do another NEPA process, you open up another opportunity for litigation. That's the Forest Service problem. That's the one that they would like to work around. So they're still going to do NEPA, they're still going to do the environmental statements. They just want to do it once and get it over and get moving.
I understand your point of view, and I have healthy respect, having served here 8 years with you. During that period of time, obviously, you didn't have anything else to do. But that said, I was appreciative of the fact that this is an area that you have considerable expertise. I happen to, as one that supports environmental justice, to have just a fundamental disagreement with your approach to the problems. But at the very same time, as I say, a healthy respect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Hastings, thank you very much. This is the kind of dialogue that is good. Get answers. And this committee appreciates and respects both of our members for being here while they have not been originally scheduled, who will come and talk substance. Just as Mr. McGovern, who sits on the Agriculture Committee, has awareness of this too, and I appreciate it very, very much. And I'm going to do everything I can do because I think it's the fair and the right thing. I mean, if somebody goes through and writes a substitute, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. The gentleman from Alabama does not seek time, the distinguished gentleman from the state of Washington.
I would, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Lucas and Mr. Bishop for bringing this bill before us. This is something that, in my short time here in Congress, we've been working on, it seems like, since day one. And I frankly don't want to go back to my constituents and tell them, well, we almost got there again. We need to get real reform, real change across the finish line. So thank you very much for your hard work getting it this far. And I speak from as somebody from the West who lives this every summer. I can tell you my community in Central Washington, I think it was 6 weeks where we had such low visibility from smoke from these catastrophic fires from all over the West that were pouring in for some reason to our area. And not just the United States, from Canada as well, that had our people really concerned with their health. So we've got, not only are we losing millions of acres of timber and grazing land and structures and homes and lives, but impacting a lot of people's health because of the negative impacts of smoke for extended periods of time. And some of you may be concerned that it also potentially, there's research going on that it may negatively impact some of the crops that are raised too. One of them comes to mind is what the effect it could have on the taste of wine, and because wine grapes, if they're exposed to smoke for too long, could have a negative impact. So there's all kinds of things.
That really helps me, right?
Some people are very concerned about that. So I'm
really concerned about taste of wine, yeah.
I'm delighted that you're bringing forward this bipartisan bill. You look at the list as co-sponsors, there's some strong bipartisan support for this effort. I know over the last several years, this has not been a Republican or a Democrat issue. This has been an American issue that we really need to find answers to. And so I'm happy you're listening to the Forest Service, that listening to some of the challenges they have, and hopefully giving them what they need as in the way of tools in these reforms. You had one of you listed a long list of supporters of this legislation, from tribes to labor unions to local governments, communities all around the West. So I'm glad you're listening to the local communities. You mentioned, Mr. Bishop, there are between 60 and 80 million acres that could go up in smoke at any time, according to the Forest Service. I think if I remember, we had 8 million acres burned this last summer. And so 10 times that burning potentially. I just can't imagine the impacts of that and the economic loss that we would see there. I did have a question about, Mr. Bishop, you mentioned that if we went along at the current pace, doing 3 million acres a year of needed management, it would take 20 plus years to get through everything. What would be the current, if we pass legislation in front of us, where would that get us to? Where would we be as far as our timetable?
Well, I can't give you a specific answer on that. Obviously, you're telling me I need to readjust my numbers from 60 to 80 down to 52 and 72.
Perhaps.
And I guess you've given me an alternative. We can just let it burn and get rid of it at the same time. I don't think that's the best approach to it.
I'm not suggesting that either.
Their goal would be to do 10 times what they're doing right now. Their goal is to do 25% of what they own per year. They're doing 2 to 3%. So rather than doing 3 million acres, we're talking about them trying to do 30 to 40 million acres a year of treatment service to try and get rid of the excess timber that would be burned if they don't get rid of it. So that's their goal. That's a logical goal. It's a healthy goal. We just need to help them to get to that. And that's why they're really wanting this bill, to give them the tools so they can get there.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. That really steps up the timetable and gets the work done that needs to get done sooner than later. So I know that people in my district will appreciate that. We had in 2014 and 2015 record-setting wildfires.
Yeah.
The number of, you've been there, you've been to my district and seen some of the results of that. And
Well, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Newhouse is exactly correct. My home in Brigham City gets your ashes. They travel that far, so yeah.
well, you're welcome. I didn't hear it. Thank you. There. So this is long overdue, and I'm glad to see the progress here. I understand there's work that's continuing that anticipated with the Senate. I would say, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Mr. McGovern for putting into the record the administration's positions, their statement. But even though there continues to be work necessary, I will say that there are strong statements in this position that the administration supports and will continue to work with the Congress, not only on the details of this forest management reform proposal, but also on finding a good solution, a sustainable solution to the fire borrowing issue, which is exactly what we have to do. As you well know, Chairman and former Chairman, we've been told several times this year that the U.S. Forest Service has now spent more than 50% of their budget on fighting fires. Having to then ignore their huge responsibility of managing the forest. They just don't have the resources to get that work done. So I'm again just delighted that we've been able to, or through your hard work, been able to get this legislation this far, and I look forward to supporting it, not only through managing the rule, but also when we get it to a final vote this week, if we can do that. I really appreciate your hard work, and with that, Mr. Chairman, yield back and happy to support this bipartisan bill.
Mr. Hess, thank you very much. The avenues of the number of people working on this, I know, has been enormous. The gentleman from the west, Windsor, Colorado, you seek time. No question. Gentleman does not seek time. Mr. Buck does not. Now, the gentlewoman also from the west, further west.
North.
Ms. Cheney. All right, northwest. Yeah, he's about 12 miles south of you, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. They're east of me. You're the east over
Due
there.
east. Due
You're the
east.
wrong side of the mountains.
Well, I was going to say some nice things, Mr. Chairman, but, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter several letters into the record from organizations supporting this important piece of legislation.
Without objection.
National Association of Counties, National Association of State Foresters, National Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, 25 different wildlife and sportsmen's groups, and the Intertribal Timber Council. And both chairmen, I really want to applaud you for bringing this bill forward. You know, we're in this, really, I think it can only be characterized as an insane situation where we've had years and years of bad policy, years of mismanagement that are causing and contributing to these forest fires, which we then don't have the money to put out. And this bill really puts forward a very practical set of solutions that, in fact, will help us not just prevent fires, but also have much healthier forests going forward. Mr. Bishop, I wanted to ask you, isn't it in fact the case, when you look at what this bill does and you look at some of the criticism that has come, that in fact the fires themselves are doing tremendous damage to wildlife habitat? They're doing tremendous damage to our water. They're doing tremendous damage to the forests, obviously, to property, and mostly to human life. But those who say that they are conservationists and environmentalists ought to be supportive of this bill because it will help us, in fact, to preserve exactly those things they say they value.
No, you're exactly right. The habitat for species, endangered or not, is destroyed in fire. So if I were to mention that word, I don't want to talk about sage grouse. The biggest threat to sage grouse is always forest fires. It doesn't come from anything else, not even the crows that eat the eggs. It comes from forest fires. You control the forest fires, you help with endangered species rehabilitation.
Thank you very much. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill. I think it's a very important first step in terms of helping us to build back the health of our forests and help to restore some sanity to the way that we're managing them. So I want to thank you both very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Joel, yield back the time. Thank you very much. Is there any other member that would seek to engage our panel? I want to thank both of you and remind you we have an awesome stenographer that would appreciate receiving anything that you brought in writing that will allow her to finish off the record properly. There have been a number of items that have been entered in the record, and I appreciate us making sure that she gets those also. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Hope you have a safe evening. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Mr. Chairman, could
Yes,
I
ma'am.
ask unanimous consent to put Congressman Jared Huffman's statement that he would have given here today in the record?
Without
And
objection.
permission to read the last paragraph. He is apparently a co-writer with Mr. Thompson. He says, "We can't simply log our way out of wildfires. My hope is that Democrats and Republicans can work together on real solutions that will fix the fire borrowing issue in a way with real-world impacts and reduce the threat of wildfires for our communities in the long term. We should be advocating for holistic, effective solutions that attack the risk of wildfires from multiple angles. Unfortunately, H.R. 2936 fails to offer the American people any real progress on this. The bill as currently written simply promotes commercial interest at the expense of the safety of our communities and environmental standards, and for this reason, I hope we can have a structured amendment process for the floor." Thank you.
Thank you very much. The opportunity for them to continue working on this, I hope, would be in a conference. And of course, all these things taken into account of the correct methodology has a lot to do with what the bipartisan effort has been that I think will continue, and I appreciate you being here. Further discussion from the committee. Thank you very much. This now closes the hearing portion. Seeing no other member who would seek time, this now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 2936, Resilient Federal Forest Act of 2017. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 2936, the Resilient Federal Forest Acts of 2017, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided among and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Agriculture and the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-36 and provides that it shall be considered as read. Rule waive all points of orders against the amendment, in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes in order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and unopponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in the report. Finally, the rule provides a motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You've heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. I would yield myself just 1 minute. H.R. 2936 is one rule, one bill, structured rule, 1 hour general debate, equally split as requested by the distinguished gentlemen who are our panelists between Agriculture and Resources Committee. Makes an order 7 amendments, 1 Republican, 4 Democrats, and 2 bipartisan. Motion to recommit. And I think this was a good hearing. Is there amendment or discussion to that?
There is.
From New York.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we give H.R. 2936 an open rule and ask that a yes vote. It's been a while, but I think this would be a good bill that we would make open so that all members can participate.
Okay, discussion? Part of the discussion on this really took place between our 2 chairmen who talked today about the vigorous input that has been involved in a working relationship, I believe, that was between 2 administrations, 2 committees, over a matter of years about getting this policy right. So I appreciate the gentleman wanting to encourage that debate. I would vote no. Is there further discussion? Vote now be on slaughter amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Roll call.
No, so gentlewoman asked for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion?
Yes, I do.
Gentlewoman, please understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the Huffman, Thompson, Polis, Hana, Rosenspear, Matsui, and Berrigan, otherwise known as the Californians. Amendment number 11. I want to move the committee make an order and give necessary waivers for the substitute amendment to H.R. 2936 by the above-mentioned representatives, which would address fire borrowing, reduce long-term fire risk by funding and authorizing fire prevention and fire preparedness programs, improve the hazardous vegetation management adjacent to electrical transmission lines on public lands, and encourage better mitigation and prevention of wildfires by states and localities. All of these members really suffered grievously, and they believe that those are obviously the things they're asking for would greatly improve the bill.
Yes,
Ask
ma'am.
for a
I
yes
think
vote.
each of them, including the gentleman from Colorado, sit at the pulse
Mm-hmm.
of many of these natural disasters. Further discussion? Vote now be on the slaughter amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Those have it, those have it. Further amendment or discussion? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 2936 by Representative Schrader, Costa, DeFazio, Thompson, Lujan, Grisham, Panetta, Custer, and O'Halloran, number 15, which would strike Title 10 and 11 of the bill and insert the bipartisan bill H.R. 2862, the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act. And just, I'd like to make sure that Mr. Cole and Mr. Newhouse are aware that they are co-sponsors of H.R. 2862, Mr. Simpson's bipartisan bill, and whose text is in Mr. Schrader's amendment, and I would urge a yes vote.
Thank you very much. Discussion on that point. Seeing none, the vote now be on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Those have it,
I
those
ask for
have
roll
it.
call.
Gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Yes.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will poll I'm sorry, clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 7 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Roll call,
A
please.
gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck, aye. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
7 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from the state of Washington, Mr. Newhouse, will handle this for Republicans.
And Mr. Hastings from the state
Judge
of Florida.
Hastings will be handling this for Democrats. So, the committee will meet tomorrow at 3:00 p.m. on H.R. 849, IPAV repeal, and H.R. 3922, the CHIP reauthorization and other health extenders. Is there further discussion for the committee? Seeing none, this now completes our work for the day. So what was it?